its record button, and I would like to welcome Luca and Daniela, and I know you're going to present yourselves more, so the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
So good morning, and I think you should also see us on the video camera. So maybe better not to see us, but we may be covered under some window, so try to see if you see us. Can you confirm that you can hear us? Some of you maybe?
Yes, I can.
I can hear you, Anne.
Okay. So the topic of today, I confirm that I've started the recording for you, and the topic of today is the alternative working methods, which is a card, part of the DARWIN Resilience Management Guideline that we have started drafting where we were in link shopping. So some of you, maybe, I think some of you were attending this session in which we have started drafting this card about the topic of alternative working methods, and now you should have received the handout that I'm now showing on the video. So the handout, as we did in some pilot exercises already, is a condensed version of the card, and it includes only the essential content of the card, specifically the part concerning the implementation. When we say implementation, we refer to the purpose of the card, of the main methodological steps that you should follow to apply the principle of the cards, and to the triggering questions, which is an important part we are always using in these cards. So maybe the first question is whether you received the card, if you had an opportunity just to open it. Can I ask you if you have seen the card?
Yes, I've copied, printed them off.
Okay, we know that Anthony has seen it. As I was mentioning before, the main topics of the card are the purpose, which is at the beginning, then the section which is called what is needed, that essentially identify the main methodological steps to follow. And then there is this division before, during, and after. And in the email sent by Iwan, we were suggesting to choose one of the three, especially if you didn't have time, because even if it may appear a bit long, so many triggering questions and many methodological steps, in reality, when you apply it, you should apply only one of the three parts. So either before a situation before any type of crisis, we are just in peacetime, or during when the crisis is ongoing. So during the crisis, you may use the card, or after, to reflect and to try to improve your resilience after a crisis has occurred. So the methodological steps and the triggering questions are divided according to during, before, and after the crisis. So I will now pass to show the presentation that you should already see on the screen. And so the first slide is an outline of what we are going to present. Don't worry, it is only 10 slides in total, but some of them are with diagrams. Most of them are with diagrams. In the first link, in the first point of the outline, we refer to the handout that I have already presented. But there you can also find a an ARM address where you can download it if you don't need in your hands. So if you didn't have opportunity to open it, you can download it again following this address. Then the second point is that we are going to present the process to develop and support alternative working methods. And we will use this acronym AWM to refer to alternative working methods. And we enter a bit into the detail of the process before, during, and after a crisis. Then we present just a few examples of triggering questions, and then we open the discussion. But the idea is also to maybe answer your questions also before the discussion, and also maybe asking some questions to you if you are willing to answer, of course. So if you don't have a specific question on the handout, I will, on the outline, I will pass to the initial part of the presentation.
Okay, so I will start. Say good morning to everyone again. The starting point for this presentation is the definition of a system failure, because of course the concept card, and also when we were discussing in link shopping in the little meeting that we had, the starting point was, okay, we want to start the discussion about supporting, developing and maintaining alternative working methods in case of system failure. But what is a system failure? What is the definition? How is defined in this context a system failure? So after the discussion we had with you, and then after going through some articles in the literature review, we came with this definition to define the starting point for defining, supporting and maintaining the alternative working methods, that is the system failure. So with system failure, we mean all these situations in which an essential component that is essential for ensuring business continuity, for instance, of a system, is not functioning anymore, or is functioning in a degraded way, and there is no backup available by design. So we're talking about some very serious accidents that are affecting the capability of the infrastructure, and they compromise the continuity. And also, for those situations, there is no straightforward backup already in place. Okay, it seems like a very catastrophic and general situation, but there are situations that happens. They, of course, we had some example also in link shopping from your experience, but here I don't know if you want to start talking and just tell us if you have some example or comments about these kind of specific events. Do you have in your experience such similar events, or did you heard about these things happening in other organizations and in other parts? So the first question for you is just, do you recognize that this system failure actually can happen and they exist? And if you have some example of it?
I can think of one occasion, not precisely here, and that was when London Air Traffic Control Centre was targeted by the IRA for a mortar bomb attack. Mm-hmm. And so the issue was, because it was a flat building and they had to prepare for it, the only contingency solution was to move the operation elsewhere, which there was something there. But that function in transfer would have been lost for a period, and there was no real effective contingency that handled that, the interregnum, the transition. But I find it interesting here, there is no backup emergency or contingency solution, and therefore the question I guess in my mind is, therefore, what is the nature of that problem that is out with that? And that's really fascinating.
Okay, and we hope that the concept car can help to just like define and investigate if it's worth going there and see what's there and how we can somehow try to cope with these things. Yes, but that's one example, very interesting.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you say again, Anthony, which was the nature of the attack that was?
It wasn't actually an attack. There was a threat of an IRA, an Irish terrorist group, mortar attack. They had a campaign of using mortars in the back of full transit vans. So they attacked 10 Downing Street, and there was a risk, a threat to the London Air Traffic Control Centre. And so we have this system we had to put in place some means of protection to deal with that particular threat. Now it's a mortar bomb. You expect a bomb attack. There was a procedure for it. But there is this transition when you go from, this is the entire operation of London Centre, it was a long time ago, to Heathrow. There was a contingency position there, but this was something quite different, because if it was a mortar bomb attack, you don't have that spin-up time. If there's a bomb threat, then there are things that happen, often precursors. This was the lobbing of a mortar into a flat roof building. So, and the operations room is not protected. So the only thing, the contingency was, there's the escape exit, get rid of the airplanes and get out. So that didn't enable you to have a smooth transition from one control regime to the other. Does that help, Luca?
Yeah. Thank you.
By the way, it went on for 3 days until the army came with a mortar radar. So there was a mortar radar. You had a little bit more alert time, because not much, as opposed to sort of reacting when the mortar bomb was going through the roof. So we carried on working.
Yeah. And I don't know if there are other examples by other people. How do you feel with this definition also of system failure? Because I think our purpose was also to, focus a bit on the situation in which there is no backup, precise backup by design. Like, for example, also in the example we were analyzing of radar loss in one European air traffic control center, the one we analyzed during the project. There was the fallback system when there was this radar loss, but in reality it was a frozen screen, and the screen was frozen also for the fallback system. So it could not work as intended by design. So people had to find another solution beyond the design envelope.
I'm glad you said that, Luca, because a couple of ideas are coming to my mind where I can remember at Swanwick where the procedures were there, but the error message, the system condition message, was rather like a Microsoft message. It says, this is wrong, and you get code 455, and it had nothing to do with that particular manifestation of the system. So there is this period, and I wonder if your definition here, it may well cover it, but there is this lack of clarity, this obscuration of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so it takes time. And there are a couple of situations I can think of in Brussels where they may have had this problem with a radar failure. So you may have a backup mode, but actually the backup mode doesn't support that particular set of circumstances.
Yeah.
And I can think of several of those examples. And
maybe.
the Irish radar case is the classic case in point, I guess.
Yeah. So maybe we can expand a little bit the definition, including not only when it's compromised, but it's not clearly usable, or it's not clear if you can also use it or not.
I wonder if it's something about uncertainty, or it's the clarity of diagnostics. So I might have fallback modes, or degraded mode might lead to a fallback mode. Mm-hmm. But actually, that fallback mode may not be precise because of the problem definition is not clearly understood. There's a sort of uncertainty period in there.
Yes. Okay, so if we just think about this kind of situation, what the concept card is saying to you is that, of course, first you have to stop a moment and think about identifying what could be some of the major system failure scenarios. So something that maybe could happen or has happened, and then start to build from this kind of awareness. Okay, maybe this could happen, maybe this has happened and it's not clear by the time how to respond. What the concept, no, the capability card, sorry, is suggesting is that, okay, after you start identify the major system failure scenario, you could start tracking to define the associated alternative working methods, and then try to disseminate the information about these alternative working methods within the organization, with other organizations, and start to organize training and activity. So these 3 steps, of course, are they seems very easy and simple to say, but what the card is going to do is to provide some details on how to define, how to evaluate, how to support and create maybe ex novo alternative working methods, starting from the concept of the phases in which you should deal with the crisis. So basically, so if you are in a before crisis, if you are facing a crisis, so you are during a crisis, or if you are after a crisis and you want to learn about it. So as Luca was presenting with the handout, there are, we have written some kind of triggering question and methodologies that should help to starting from the system failure to define at least how the working methodology, alternative working methodology can be considered and evaluated. Because we will see it's a little bit complex and there are some potential problems that maybe we want to discuss with you. But if you don't have question, we will proceed entering into these 3 building blocks in the perspective of the before, during, and after, and we will explode those blocks. And look up and
Okay, so I will now say something more about how the process has been instantiated into the before, during, and after. So the same basic process which was introduced by Daniele. And for what concerns the phase before a crisis, what we have identified as several steps is like, again, I have to recommend you to remember that it is a very generic process because it is intended to apply to several different domains. For example, domains in which you may have a very quick crisis emergencies, like in the aviation, air traffic control domain, or domains in which crises are much longer, as could be for a disease outbreak or another kind of crisis emergency in the healthcare domain, just to make 2 examples. So the card and the process in this part of the card is still very generic. So we start with what we call the focus group, in the sense that there is a decision to identify, to reflect on possible system failures. So this focus group is done with representatives of people from the managerial levels, but also from the front-end operators. And these people together reflect on, maybe they have already some information and input, but we are in a peaceful situation yet. And they identify together they brainstorm on possible major system failure scenarios. Then, based on this, they discuss on possible alternative working methods. And they define them. I will tell something more. And once they have defined the alternative working methods, they have to assign the responsibility to a role or a person in the organization to say when is the moment to apply these alternative working methods. And as part of this brainstorming discussion, that sometimes the organization have to document, to report what is the identified working method. It could also be a revised alternative working method, a method which was used in the past but required changes. And then an inevitable step is to activate an awareness campaign inside the organization to make sure that the relevant people, the relevant roles are aware about the possibility to activate these alternative working methods, or possibly training activities if the application of this method require skills that cannot be taken for granted, skills and competencies. And there may be cases in which it is essential to also inform other organizations of the possibility to activate this alternative working method, because the application of it has implication also for the work of other organizations. And among these steps, the most complex one is, of course, the definition of the alternative working method. So here are a few points more detailed. This definition of alternative working methods may imply the revision of an existing one, as I was saying before, or also the application of an older working method. So we were discussing the example in the air traffic control. Quite often the use of a fallback system, so a system that replaces the main one, implies the use of an older system that was used in the past, and which the representation of air traffic is less accurate than the state-of-the-art system, but that the management, the organization decides to keep as a possible alternative in case of problems. But there may be other situations in which other older working methods are used in a more spontaneous way, really as a contingency solution in that moment. Or they may be completely new alternative working methods, so something which was not intended by design, but also never used in the past. Or this analysis can be based on the use of another card of the DARWIN Resilience Management Guidelines, so the card that was discussed in a previous webinar, the one about managing available resources. So the analysis made by this card can influence also the identification of alternative working method. Or and then at the end of this process, of course, which would be with with another letter, is you have to select one of these. So you first consider different strategies, revision of an existing method, applicability of an older method, completely brand new alternative working method, also an analysis of the resources, but at the end you have to select one or more methods that then you will indicate in a dedicated report that all the organization has to know. So this is the process as would appear before a crisis. I will just show now the process during a crisis, which is quite similar, just that you have to differentiate the situation whether the ongoing system failure, so the system failure which has been identified because you are already in a crisis situation, corresponds to one of the typologies of alternative working method that you had already identified, or it does not correspond. So the alternative working method that were discussed and identified do not fit to the crisis you are experiencing. So if it is a yes, you have the alternative working method, this is the process. So the responsible person or role which was assigned has to approve that this alternative working method is used, and has to inform all the relevant personnel in the organization, has to check if any adaptation is needed, because it may be that it corresponds to that case, but still is not that precise, especially in this situation of uncertainties we were referring to. You may need to do adaptations. And you may also consider the analysis of available resources to the other card we were saying before. And then you may need to check at regular time intervals whether the system failure you have started with has now been solved, and so if there is a possibility to go back to the standard working method. This is also an important step, because otherwise you may continue working with a method which is not very efficient, even with when the situation has been recovered.
And once again, it's not very clear when is the moment to revert to the regular or normal working methods, and we have seen in literature a lot of discussion about this gray area. So
while if there was no alternative working method at hand, you have to establish a sort of task force, and here it will depend a lot of the nature of the crisis, whether it is a crisis that allow you to take these decisions with a bit of time to reflect with other people or not. But in general, it would be a task force to identify the alternative working method with a process similar to the one we have said before. And then after this has been identified, you have to disseminate it inside your organization to inform everyone, or to arrange ad hoc trainings if you have time again, and if you think if it is needed, because, for example, people do not have the necessary skills and competencies to use this alternative method. And then you may need to inform other organizations, as I was saying before, and again to check when you are going back to the ordinary situation and the system failure has terminated. The task force will have also to consider more in detail some aspect, like, for example, again, if it is possible to use an older working method or a completely new alternative working method, if what is the situation of the available resources, and as we'll have to take a decision on which is the alternative working method to select. I pass to the after crisis, then of course the floor will be open to possible questions. So the process is very similar, it's just that here we are in a situation in which the crisis unfortunately has already occurred. So the focus group, as in the before crisis situation, now is more focused on analyzing what happened and if the method which was used was working properly. So it's working to expand immediately this first step. So essentially, you have to assess if an alternative working method was successful when used. You have to check if the skills and competencies were adequate, the skills of people to use this method. You have to consider if, as the crisis was evolving, there were new alternative working methods that emerged during the crisis that is worth considering for possible similar event in future. Like an example of, we were discussing about, again, the radar failure. There were practices that emerged during the failure, which was not at all considered by design. Like, for example, the use of a training platform that in that specific crisis situation remained active, and it was the only one in which it was possible to visualize the air traffic. So this platform was not in the main control room, but it was used by one of the supervisors to go and check moment by moment the situation of the most critical part of the traffic in order to inform the air traffic controller that were communicating with the aircraft. So this was not at all identified by design. It was a practice emerged during the crisis, which was anyhow considered quite successful. Then, the process may imply proposing completely new alternative working method, because the crisis has shown that the existing methods are not applicable, and also the revision of existing of other method which was already used and which was maybe successful, but that require adaptations. So I don't know what's the situation in terms of time now. Okay. So do you have any questions on this process that we have highlighted so far?
And I just want to add that after we will go through the triggering questions so that they will support each of these steps, or at least the main steps, because it's easy to say, okay, assess if alternative working method was successful, because you can say success or fail, but for other steps it's more difficult, and the triggering question are specified and designed in order to support at least and guide a little bit to be sure that if you want to do this, you don't miss some relevant aspects that we know from experience or from literature review that should be considered during the different steps.
Yeah, so each group of triggering question is associated to a specific step, mostly, I mean, quite one-to-one relationship with small changes in the before and in the after crisis situation mainly. So there is one case, there is one category more and one category less. But as we did for other cards, the categories of triggering questions are recurrent, and so they are the same for a matter of consistency between one phase and the other. Do you have a question in first place about the process, which was highlighted so far, and that you may have seen in the handout?
Can I just ask a question there? In the healthcare sector where I work, I would say alternative working methods are quite common. I think this is a very structured way of actually identifying them, but I think you revert from high state-of-the-art technology workplace, but we always deal with human beings that won't react in the same way. And when human beings don't react as we want them to in the healthcare, in regards to healthcare, then I think doctors and nurses quite often use alternative working methods that, if they're successful, will become standard operation procedures later on. Have you noticed with the likes of air traffic management that it's okay to use ad hoc alternative working methods on the spot, and then being able to lift the discussion afterwards to make them maybe standard operating procedures if they work, or alternative working methods as a backup? Is it as freely spoken about as I think it is in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, I think it's it's intended for all sectors. So of course, depending on the sector, it will be applied in a more flexible way or a less flexible way. But for example, here the focus group in the after crisis situation, I think, would be the situation in which you analyze that if this method that was used is worth being introduced into also a formal procedure or guideline of the organization. In this case, it will change a bit the nature of it, of course, because it will be less spontaneous and more formalized, but still it will be a manifestation of that, of the fact that the organization has learned something, and that it is possible to learn something also from spontaneous events. Yeah.
But I would also add that also in ATM domain, there are a lot of human beings that generate some needs of alternative working methods, maybe not as frequently as in the healthcare domain, maybe, but still the quality and the typology of situation are very different, but still they have to deal with the human beings. And there was also a focus for preparing these cards on creativity, which may be not an alternative working methods, but is a theme that somehow is common. So what are the pros and the cons of being creative, using alternative ways of approaching an issue? And so we tried also with some of the triggering questions to gain the contribution on the studies on creativities and how they can be implemented and be used to generate, for instance, alternative working methods, but also for assessing the effect of alternative and creativity and lateral thinking, for instance, and in the after crisis. So maybe the situation is different, but there are for sure some common points that can be faced even from a healthcare or an aviation point of view, if that was one of the questions.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's just it's my prejudice that I don't know enough about air traffic management, but my prejudice is that it's not okay to sort of deviate from standard operating procedures. If you have an alternative working method that's known and you've done the work, you've used, for example, this capability card, then you will have alternative working methods as a backup. But what do you do when you have the ad hoc alternative working method that a person decides to do? That's I'm just curious if it's as acceptable in the likes of air traffic management as it is in the healthcare sector.
Could I
Okay. Yes.
could I interject there? Ewan, the notion that ATM is very prescriptive and prescribed is a bit of a misnomer. I know in America they have playbooks that deal with certain things, but in Europe it's less so. So the rule book says 5 miles and 1,000 feet separation, doesn't say how to do it. So how I achieve that can come in all sorts of different ways. And the situations you're dealing with have a lot of degrees of freedom, but not as many as healthcare, I imagine. So I, for my 38 years as an air traffic controller, worked with a rule which said that nothing in this book shall prevent you from using your initiative, because rules and procedures can't be prescribed for every situation. Now, I'm not sure it's tested, but there's a lot of degrees of freedom in ATM, and there are lots of options you have for dealing with strategic problems as well as tactical problems. So it's not as tightly configured, in my experience, as other organizations. You can convert your airspace environment into one that has lots of freedom and opportunity. So bad weather, for example, is a case which is something you just take. It's not an exceptional circumstance. It's there all the time, and I can create extra airspace to play with by going to the military and saying, "This is my problem. Can you do that? We'll do this, and we'll keep apart, but it gives me more maneuver room." So it's a very adaptable organization. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. That's a big help. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, it is easier to discuss in these terms in a domain like healthcare, because especially when you work with the air traffic controllers, or sometimes also with the pilots, there is a reluctancy to say so openly that you can work, not complying with the principles of the procedures. There are many cases in which the goal of the policy procedure is clear, but the way to apply it can be different, as Anthony was saying. But still, there is some reluctancy to express yourself in these terms, like I have found this solution, it was very good, and to advertise it. I think also is a cultural constraint that can be understood, because these systems have to be highly reliable and cannot count so much on individual differences. But it does not mean that this variability does not exist also in these domains. So, but it's easier to discuss in these terms in healthcare. This is true. So, okay, I don't know if there are other points, maybe other comments by other colleagues.
I would have a comment, or several. I don't know. I find this topic to be really, really interesting and very complex. First of all, this I think Ewan pointed to that a little bit. There's this paradox in a sense of alternative working methods being, sometimes overlapping with contingency plans, and you define it, or SOPs. You define it as being different than contingency plans. Especially when you don't have contingency plans, but at the same time, there's a strong overlap potentially, because an alternative working method can crystallize into an SOP or contingency plan through the process that you're showing. And so and as you were showing, it relates to lots of other topics in the guidelines. The managing available resources. You mentioned it. We've actually during the sessions on this card, we've had very similar conversations than the one you just pointed to. But it relates also to these notions of brittleness. It relates to the notions of adaptation. It relates to other notions that we try to address in other cards. So it's quite complex from that standpoint. But really the main comment I would like to make is to me, some of the things that Ewan was pointed to, and that also Anthony was mentioning, was this alternative working method. It might be a term that we use at the system level, but to me, relates a lot to the workaround term, which we tend to use more at an individual level or team level, maybe. But there's a lot on the workarounds, and you have some of the same discussions, some of the same paradoxes around on the workarounds. For example, they are very context dependent, as opposed to things that you can, sort of imagine prior to situations. They sort of emerge in situations because there's a need for doing something differently, potentially in a creative way, potentially in a way that was used in the past, but is no longer used. And so because of that, it's also strongly related to the notions of skills and expertise. And maybe that's my main comment, is to say maybe part of the card should be making sure that the organizations maintain in different ways the skills and expertise that are needed for people to imagine other ways of working in situations in which the regular ways don't work. So, for example, especially when you relate to old working ways, what happens when the GPS falls down and you've been, it has been the main instrument in your navigation system. People used to do without GPS, but it requires a number of skills that are disappearing if the organization is not investing in maintaining them, and so forth. I mean, that's a small example, but so I'm not sure I've helped. I've helped you, but I think these are all extremely interesting questions. I think in the context of resilience, and so it's this simple card holds a lot of what we're trying to do in the project. I think, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you. As we pass to explain some example of triggering question, I think there are some of these topics we were referring to that are addressed. So maybe it's worth giving a look to the following slide. Okay, this slide is just to recall you that the triggering questions are grouped in different categories that are recurrent in the before, during, and after. And we will not read all of them, of course, otherwise it will be very boring. But we may pick some of them, especially if you are interested in some of them.
For instance, the older working methods that Matthew was mentioning, we have...
we have a slide on this because we knew that it was a topic of particular interest on which people ask questions to themselves. And for example, here, if you see the question number 10 in the handout, we say, can we revert to old school methods that existed before the system affected by the failure was available in the organization? So are there really these old methods that can be reused? Would the older working methods be capable of managing the complexity of the process that we previously supported with the system affected by this failure? So, that you may have an older method, but which was fit for different conditions. Of course, this was also affected by the discussion on the radar loss, because we were saying we know that in principle air traffic controllers have to work also with in so-called procedural methods. So when the aircraft were controlled only with maps and speaking with the pilots and asking point by point information about the position, so without visualizing the aircraft on the radar screen. But of course, this method allow you to manage much more reduced number of aircraft in the same unit time. So you have to consider how the situation has changed. So to see how far you can use an older working method. Or the question number 12, what is the level of obsolescence of the tools used as part of the older working methods? So perhaps we rely on tools that are still there, but we didn't maintain them properly, so they are now unfit to be used because they are not as efficient as they should be to be used in the present context. So this has to be checked. Or do we maintain the tools formerly used in older working method in a way that would allow us to reuse them? And this I have already said. Can we make adaptation to the tools used as part of older working methods to compensate for their obsolescence? So some adaptation that maybe are cost effective, so it's worth doing these adaptations because this situation of system failure is very unlike, but if it happens, the consequences are very hard. So maybe it's worth spending a bit of money also on these whole tools, even if you don't plan to use them in a normal situation. Or the question 15 is, are we periodically refreshing the skills and competence that would be needed by the personnel to use the older working method?
Here we have an example not from the TM, but from the healthcare. That is, they reported us a story about the laparoscopy techniques, but if it doesn't work and you want to replace with the older working methods, you need the skills and competencies. Correct? That maybe not be available to everyone that they started working already with laparoscopy tools. So you should start thinking about also the skills and the competencies, not only the update of the tools, right?
I know that nowadays also healthcare organizations and sanitary companies, managed in all the different countries, have to take into account a lot the costs of all the services they provide. So I guess that this is a difficult consideration to make. Maybe a lot of money was invested to have this laparoscopy equipment and also to build the necessary skills to use them. And it may be difficult to decide if it is worth training people to use also the older techniques if you don't count to use them. So this is going to be a very difficult decision to take. I don't know if some of the healthcare people are willing to comment on this.
Yes, I would say that it is true. However, also in telemedicine, where you can you can undertake a surgery, being in Amsterdam and doing the surgery for a patient in Shanghai. However, this technique implies that you are a very well-skilled surgeon.
But do you think that in the majority of cases the technique, the surgeon very expert on telemedicine now and okay, I don't get the word. Will be able to do traditional surgery if needed?
This is the problem. In fact, there should be money should be invested either on old technique school skills and the new one. You cannot
one of the two.
You cannot. Yes, you cannot do without having both skills.
Other comments on this specific?
I would say there's another aspect to that, and that's the state-of-the-art technology, where at the moment, at least in healthcare, there's still a lot of we're very dependent on our surgeons, but there is a move towards robotics and there are successful operations being performed by robots. So this is definitely an aspect where you'd have to draw a line on the fallbacks methods if we start using robotics more and more. We do still need a backup of the human being if something goes wrong.
Could I make a comment on the working methods, if Ewan's finished?
Yes, of course.
I find it quite fascinating, and I think ATC may be a little different from others in that, Luca, you mentioned procedural, which I believe is now called non-radar. So as an air traffic controller, as a radar controller, I can use, my tool set includes both non-radar and radar. It's there for me. It's how I used to do it, and you know, tactically I can use it interchangeably. I think what's interesting here is the reason why old working methods were changed. And if I look further on to limitations selected AWMs, you know, if I want to use an old working method, then what is the change that led to it being disposed of? And therefore, the operational environment, is it suitable to be used? So there are certain conditions, for example, that it might change. And a classic case is I used to be able, as a controller, to say to two aircraft, see the one in front, you can descend behind him with him in sight. And I could do that, slightly illegally, at up to 28,000 feet. I can't do that anymore. That stopped in about the 1990s because a new working method came with an alerting system, short-term conflict alert. However, in this sort of situation, I might want to be able to use a technique like that, which was once available, but the tool set doesn't allow me. The short-term conflict alert comes off even though it's a controlled maneuver. So therefore, there is a gray area about how our procedures allow some of those older working methods to be legitimate. Now, there's a kind of a way around that because the vertical separation standards in ATC vary. And if I lost radar, I could use emergency separation vertically at 500 foot or 1,000 feet. And there's that sort of gray area. And so I think part of the older working methods is a hybrid way of working. And the question I have about this card is, to what extent will creative thinking be supported and enabled, or will the card create a particular mindset that limits creative thinking?
Yeah, I think the mindset is critical. I mean, the most of the work we do in this kind of project is to create a different mindset, but it is not easy to make it. I mean, it's not always compatible with the rules of an organization. Yeah, so that.
Yep. So I can give you an example where Swanwick Center in 2013 was unable to open more than 7 sectors, typically 24, 25 sectors. So they were, because of an interesting comm system problem, they couldn't split the sectors at 6:30. You would have 5 sectors on a night duty, and gradually you grow that through the day. You constantly move it around. And so they could, and this is a busy Saturday when this happened. And it took about 15 hours to sort the problem out. But the controllers came up with a way of working. So the 2 units at Swanwick, there's terminal control and area control. And there's a way of getting into Europe that meant you didn't talk to the other unit. But institutionally, the organizational management said, no, you can't do that. And yet the controllers knew they could do it. It was tinkering with the rules a bit, but okay. So here was a solution that they found, and it was an institutional block. So you have these different mindsets, and I think there's something in this type of card which allows those tensions and conflicts to be resolved. You have to identify what that tension is. So understanding the limitations and then putting a positive spin. So if I look at 21 to 24, limitations, to me there's something missing there. And that is, what are the conditions of possibility that makes these things happen? Now I've turned it around to focusing on the limitations to working on how can I make this work. And I think that subtle change creates a more positive outcome. The limitations are necessary, they tell us something, but actually I want to know what the conditions of possibility are that allows this creative alternative working method to be used.
So you are suggesting to integrate, for example, the question about limitations of alternative working methods.
But potentially, I think it could be so much broader though, Luca, in that maybe the AWMs is another section here on what are the conditions of possibility and what's needed to create that. So I might have a limitation. So there's another bit in there, perhaps extending that by saying, what is necessary to make this possible? Who do I need to talk to? Because you might need to go and speak to the government to remove a nighttime restriction, or there are these opportunities, but having them on a bit of paper, talking about them, allows you to have a more positive approach and allows you to come up with solutions, which allows for more constructive decision making, I think.
Yeah. Maybe with the process we have identified the fact that there should be a responsible personal role to decide whether the method is applicable or not. It's a bit too simplistic. Yeah. But I think the intention was exactly to highlight the fact that anyhow an organization cannot do it with each individual deciding spontaneously in a situation in which it cannot be clear if this action is legitimate or not. So it's like that someone should take the responsibility, as this famous line that Sidney Dekker wanted to draw. No, someone should draw this line and say if it is acceptable to report some kind of events because it is useful anyhow, or if it is not acceptable because these events should not have happened. So
I think I agree. I think I agree with you entirely. So first of all, you might think it's simplistic. Actually, it's not, because there'll be different situations, and that's the problem with the carb is no two situations will be the same. Yeah. Having one person who makes that decision, yes, okay, but then that person needs to have all the information available to be able to make that decision. And so what's wrong against that person saying, look, we want to do this, so actually can we get a dispensation from the CAA to allow that person to have an airplane in airspace that's open but nobody's in it? So all you're going to do is you're going to transfer from London DC to Paris or Reims, and they're in that piece of airspace. See, where's the condition of possibility that allows that to happen, that allows traffic to flow again? It's there. The controllers can see it, but management say no, we don't want to do it. Well, okay, that's to my mind is how do you choose which options to go for and pursue? And that one was tied off, yet it could have worked. In order to do that, you have to invoke somebody outside of the organization. So I think that there can be a danger of restricting creativity. Yeah. And is that necessary? That could be a good thing, by the way, but there's a downside too. And to what extent do the cards actually help and allow these creative solutions? There's too much of a sameness in alternative working methods based on the way we do things today. And I think alternative working methods are truly alternative. And so they'll challenge some of the ways, our mindset of thinking that we have today.
Okay.
We have Julia that wanted to say something, but maybe is having a microphone issue. I don't know if now it's all set.
It's solved.
Seems not. If you want to call, we can put you on a speaker.
Or you can also write a question in the field there, Julia, if that's a possibility.
Let's see what
my Italian's limited, but I saw Google Translate. I'm sure Luca and Daniele can help you with the question. So write in Italian if you want.
So we are looking at the chat.
Okay, Julie is typing.
Okay. For the moment, she says hi.
You also have your number, right? Please. Okay. I'd like to make a general comment. Okay.
So you may also see the chat. But she says it's too long to explain it with the chat, also to elaborate on it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pity. So
yeah, we can just say if you want to, please come in with comments. You can send an email to myself or to Luca or Danielle afterwards. So we really want all the comments coming in. So that's also an alternative.
Working methods. Yeah.
I think Danielle has suggested to call by
Yes.
mobile phone, but I don't know if it worked. So
There's other limitations.
as a person who has the responsibility to decide on it, I say for the moment we go on. And Julia said that she will send an email on what she wanted to say. So thank you. And the following slide, which is basically the last slide with new contents, is the example of triggering question about limitation of selected alternative working methods. Maybe it's not worth entering into the details of them because we have already spoken about them. These slides was to encourage, examples. It's the last slide. Example of alternative working method, feedback on the triggering question, and some of them we already had, and suggestion for improving the concept card process before, during, and after. And the questionnaire.
The questionnaire should be in the next slide.
Okay,
yes.
there was a mistake in the
slide. No, it's not a mistake.
Yeah. And also for you to know that we would kindly ask you to fill in a questionnaire. Could be an alternative way of saying or providing your feedback, especially if you couldn't speak.
It's because, of course, we had this rapid prototype of this new card, started from different discussion, probably shopping, and then we went on and we somehow produced this version of the card, but as it's valid for, let's say, whatever happens to all the other previous cards. We, of course, in the previous cards, we managed to went through a more in-depth and long process of revision, collecting feedbacks, in improving and generating recommendation for improvements, and then change again and reevaluate the card in different contexts, in different occasions, and so on. But it would be nice also for these cards that these two cards that will be very quickly, but with a lot of example and starting from a lot of materials, we try to prototype. It would be interesting to also have an evaluation that is in line with the evaluation criteria that we use also for the different concept cards. Of course, the level of maturity of this card could be different than the other, but it would be interesting to hear some of your opinion after we discuss it very briefly, but we went directly to the point of this concept card. So the reason for the questionnaire is also for improving the cards that was built together with you across the different situations, and to have the feedbacks on what is missing. And that is part of the DARWIN process to just co-generate also content within different work package, but also with the DCoP and all the users that came across to this webinar. So,
yeah. So please, if you, we are happy if you can, if you want to spend a few minutes in answering the questionnaire. I don't know if you want to send the link also in directly in the chat. Maybe it's easier to I don't know if Daniel, you
yes,
can
yes,
do
I'm
it.
typing.
Okay, okay. And apart from that, if you look at these questions on the slides, I don't know if you have other specific comments. I know some of someone has to leave, and Julia cannot speak, but maybe you have other suggestions. And
may I say something?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Luca and Daniela, for your detailed presentation. It's well structured and I find it very interesting. I have just one consideration. It's not a question, it's just my personal consideration regarding the whole work, regarding the methods. From the one hand, I am dealing with the healthcare sector. On the other hand, I am dealing with the civil protection sector. And I was just wondering, how could we inspire our organizations that we work for to pay more attention on that phase? For example, how to prepare the working focus groups and so on and so on. What can we do to inspire them, to make them want to spend more time or more attention on that? It is just my consideration, it's not a question. But I think we should think about that, because as the UN mentioned before, we are in front of the system that should evolve, but from the other hand, we are in front of human beings that react and respond in the different ways. So this is the question I'm making myself, that's all.
Yes, it's a very, very valid point, and we are experiencing a bit the limitation also of our work in this respect. So we should think more of how to bridge this gap between the expectation we create also of potential improvement of resilience within the organization, and the fact that the decision makers in this organization will be really motivated to apply these principles. A feedback that I have received in different situations from the DCoP meetings and from the pilots sometimes is, okay, you have these triggering questions, but you never give us the answers to the questions. And with the people that see them for the first time, it's a normal reaction. What we are trying to do every time, but I know it's can appear a bit, that we are expecting too much, is that people understand that the questions are there for people, to help people to answer them. So we assume that each sector and each organization is different, and the guiding, the triggering question should help to have an active attitude. So I try to see what I can improve in my organization, trying to answer these questions. So this implies having a more active approach than just expecting from the guideline that you will have a precise answer. And of course, this can also be improved, creating more at the part of the guideline of the concept card, capability cards that is more adapted to a specific sector. But also this work is very difficult. And it is not very advanced in the project, we have to say. But it is true that it is not easy to bridge this gap. One of the possibilities to combine the questions and the theoretical principle with examples, with concrete examples, is what we are trying to do. And so this is also why we are asking your help. I think we have some good examples, and the way to present them, it's very important. But also we have to make sure that people understand the analogy of an example with their situation. So an example which is very far from their concrete situation should be in principle applicable also to their situation. But this requires some abstraction effort, which is not always very, very easy to do.
But for sure, the example can support to just like put the relevant aspects in front of people that is taking some decision. I know it's not easy to just say, okay, this is the concept car, just start and do a focus group for sure, but providing some examples is very important because it says that, hey, even in I don't know, in ATM or in a nuclear power plant, something wrong and unexpected and without backup by design can happen. So if can happen there and it's very relevant there and there are solutions that can be developed together, then maybe even in our sector can be as relevant. For sure, there are some other elements that are essential to start this discussion, but we don't have an answer for this. There should be another concept card on how to present the concept card itself to a guidelines to a manager or whatever. But I'm just joking here, but just to say that maybe these kind of output are just a part of a wider process. Yeah.
No, just an additional example is when we were doing, we did a pilot exercise in which was not anticipated in the work plan of DARWIN, and we did it in the domain highway domains. So we did we applied the Emergo training system methodology to a situation of an accident on the highways. And we analyzed how the emergency services worked.
Together with the Red Cross of Bologna?
Yeah. The Red Cross of Bologna was our reference in the organization. And something we were told by the people there is that because they were trying to reactivate an old project which was concerning with these emergency interventions on the highways. And what we were told, for example, by people of the fire brigade, but also of the police, is that the event that occurred in Italy, you know, this Rigopiano accident, this I don't remember the term in English. It's a snowball, a slavine, which was caused by the earthquake and the heavy snow during the winter in the central region of Italy, in Abruzzo, caused an hotel on the mountain to be completely destroyed, and it was very hard to bring them to bring their emergency rescue services, because all over the region there were so many situations of emergency, lack of power supply, and the prioritization was very difficult. And this situation, which was the most severe one, was completely underestimated at the beginning. They didn't understand that it was a severe situation.
I mean, not the earthquake plus the snow, but the fact that this hotel was at risk, because of course it seems like there were other priorities because of the earthquake and the snow condition. Yeah.
So what we were surprised to hear is that apparently that situation reactivated a bit the willing of people managing this older project, the project dealing with accident on highways, emergency healthcare services in these circumstances. So apparently completely disconnected situation reactivated the interest for this kind of exercises, like if there was an awareness that this kind of exercises also in peaceful time are quite important. So just to say that a good combination of theory and concrete example of the past could be a good strategy, but it is not easy.
Yes.
So we are now close to the end of the time which was allocated, and we also would like to leave you some time to fill in the questionnaire if you are willing to do so. So I don't know if there are other points you want to raise.
Daniela, my screen's frozen, so it's stuck on slide 6. So could you send me a link to the questionnaire to an email address, please?
Here is in the chat. I tried to send you.
Can you open the chat of the?
No, it's complete. My screen's completely frozen.
Okay.
So I've got the chat. I have the chat open, but it's I can't access it. It's stuck at.
I'll send you an email straight away, Anthony, with the link.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Still electronic. Okay.
We need a concept card for this.
So I don't know. Other comments, feedback, or do we want to finish now?
And we thank you, by the way, for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you, both Luca and Daniela. It's been very interesting, and of course, thank you to everyone who's been taking part. Julia, please send us your questions and thoughts so we can take them into consideration. And just before we stop, I'd just like to remind you that this was the third webinar in the 3-part series, and the other 2 webinars, you can find information about them on the Darwin homepage. The first one is you can actually receive the full recording. Sadly, we had some sound issues during the second webinar, so there you can find the presentation at least. Please get back to us if you have any other questions, but apart from that, thank you very much, Daniela and Luca. That was very good, very interesting. Anthony, I'm sending you an email straight away. You'll have it now.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Luca, Daniela.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luca and Daniela. Very good, very good. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.